Nicole, welcome to the show. I am so excited to have you here and to talk about, I think it's an important topic because one of the things that I find that discourages people when they get into the world of personal finance is all of the sensational stories, if you will. All of the incredible, miraculous feats that people have that they brag about. You know, I paid off $100,000 of debt in 2 weeks and I make $500,000 a day, and it's just like, where are the relatable stories? I think those relatable stories are the thing that really helps people connect with what we talk about in this world. And so I'm really excited to share your story because it's a very ordinary story, which I think we need so much more of. So welcome, and let's dive in with an intro. Tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
So my name's Nicole. I am the founder of Arise Financial Coaching, and I'm on a mission to help more people feel confident with their money. The reason I really started this company was because when I started my financial journey as a young adult, it was one of those things that I didn't think was going to be a big deal until it became one. So I got married young, and I'm from a Puerto Rican family, which means my dad is very in my business. And my dad was a software engineer, which means he really wanted me to become an attorney, to become an engineer. It was his biggest disappointment when I did not have a tech mind. And so when I was getting married, he talked to me a ton about finances. And because I was 21, 22, I thought, oh, who cares? Like, we're in love. Why does it even matter? Right. And I wondered why my dad made such a big deal out of it. And so when I got married, it wasn't until we were planning our wedding that I started to realize, oh, this is actually just as big of a deal as I thought, or I had feared, really. I started to get regular panic attacks while doing our budget for our wedding. And I remember like sitting at the kitchen table in college. So again, I'm getting married young. And my husband, soon to be husband, he only made like 28,000 at the time. I remember looking at him and being like, if we can't afford this wedding where our friends are bartending and our friends are making the cake, how the hell are we going to afford a life? And it was tough because our whole kind of engagement and first year of marriage, I would say, was really consumed by financial stress. And here I was kind of feeling like, oh, love is love is all you need to make you happy. And so we realized, okay, this financial thing is really taking a toll on our happiness. So we're going to do a few things. The first is I started going to therapy because of some real anxiety I had. But the second was we started investing in getting financial education and financial help. So our first beginning in the financial world was like a lot of people's, it was a Dave Ramsey course. And I remember that $100 course felt like, oh my gosh, I'm going to die. But it was first learning how to budget that made me realize like, oh, maybe I don't have to be so afraid about earning more money all the time. And I don't have to fear that because I didn't become an attorney, I was destined to live in the slums, which is, dad told me. So we started to get really serious about budgeting and I became a total nerd. So in 10 months, we had turned kind of our student debt around. We paid off $30,000 in 10 months. And then over the next 3 to 4 years, so it was by age 27, we were able to pay off all of our debt. We started investing in boring old retirement accounts, but by age 27 hit Coast Fire, which for those of you listening, you might know what that is. It's where you have enough money invested that even if you never invest another dollar, you'll still retire a multimillionaire. And that was really powerful because we were only making, I don't like to say only, because at the time it was an average annual salary. So for a family of our size. So our adjusted gross income was $56,000 a year for those 5 years. And we felt a huge weight of relief because I felt like I didn't have to live in fear over our normal income. And I didn't know financial coaching was an industry. I didn't know people did this online. All I knew was that learning how to feel confident with my money, creating budget systems that would work for me and my life, changed the trajectory of my life, of my marriage, of my happiness. And so I just started helping friends and family for free for years. And it wasn't until COVID, when my husband got furloughed, that we kind of looked at each other we had 2 babies at the time. And we're like, oh, what if I charge somebody? And that's when I learned about financial coaching as an industry, decided to get more mentorship. And since then, we've been able to help over 600 clients. And we have a small and mighty team of 3. And my goal is to help as many people put that story of shame and fear and stress with money in the past and start to use it as a tool to enjoy their life.
That's incredible. And I can't wait to dive into so many of the aspects that you just mentioned. I think the thing for me, I've had a very similar experience in the sense that I came from a household that had very specific ideas of how you build wealth. And that's usually go to college, become an engineer, doctor, lawyer, work for 45 years. Hopefully you get a pension or something. And it's like, that's the only route that we're given. And so I love to find folks like you who have found alternate ways to incorporate the thing that you're passionate about, helping people with their personal finances and turning it into a business and having the ability to create financial stability for yourself and also for other people. That's incredible. Okay, let's go back in time. Before you were a financial coach, what were you actually doing career-wise?
So when I was newly married, I took a cold call sales job right out of college, and it was grueling. Like it was, I mean, smile and dial. I was getting yelled at. I was doing it. Okay. And I hated that job. And the reason I took it was because I wanted to pay off our student debt. So when I look at that first year, I learned a lot. So I look back with gratitude. But the second we paid off our last extra to pay off our car, I put in my notice and I left that job because it was soul sucking. So I worked in corporate sales. And then after that, I worked as a youth ministry worker, which is different, but it was a passion for me to be with the youth. And then when I had my first, I thought, oh, well, I think a good mom wants to stay at home, right? So I decided to quit my job and stay at home like I thought I wanted. Long story short, that did not go well for my personality and who I am. And so being a stay-at-home mom was not for me, but I love my children. I just decided like I really needed something that I could put my intellect towards, that I could really feel challenged and motivated by. And I wouldn't have known before I became an entrepreneur that entrepreneurship was that, but I'm so thankful for that like COVID crisis because it pushed me into taking a chance that I don't think I would have taken.
Yeah, I think there was a transformative time for a lot of people. It kind of made you sit back and reflect and think about, am I living a life that I designed versus one that just I kind of fell into? And like, what would I do differently now that I have this time to reflect? So I'm so glad you took advantage of that. It was the same experience for me as well. I'm curious, obviously as a fellow Puerto Rican, we also have very interesting relationships with money oftentimes, the Latino community in general. We've got a lot of baggage, as I like to say.
So much baggage.
So I'd love to know from you, like, what were those internalized messages about money and wealth that you had kind of ingrained in you by your family?
Oh my gosh. Like, do you have the time? That's really what I'm wondering. I mean, I think growing up in a Hispanic household, so I was born in the US, my sister was born in Puerto Rico, and my parents are both extremely Puerto Rican, but
Assimilated as well.
They assimilated. So my parents are the type that like they can code switch, and they do. So my mom always loved it because she was a flight attendant. And so people always thought she didn't speak Spanish. And so she would always get in there and just start talking to people, you know, how it is. So I really enjoyed that my parents had this kind of a very not utilitarian, but tough attitude. So my dad always talked about his experience coming to the States, very similar to an immigrant. Like he told the story of how he came to this country, even though it's not this country, it's the same country. But when my sister was born with $20 in his bank account, and he had to ask for a pay advance to get diapers and pizza because my sister was a baby at the time. And he talks about how he looked at this land as a land of opportunity and he wanted to give us those opportunities. So my dad was a really hard worker. Looking back, he's a software engineer, was one, worked really hard and made very good money doing it. And at the same time, financial stress was at the heart of everything in my household growing up. So it's like a weird dichotomy where I see that we were ahead. If you're working for Microsoft in the 90s and the early 2000s, you're doing pretty well, but we had so many other things going on with my parents' spending and their relationship that gave my dad this real pessimistic outlook on the American dream. And I had kind of two big wake-up calls. The first was when I was in high school. I remember my parents, they had gone through some turbulence in their relationship, and my dad had told me, your college fund is gone. And so you need to figure it out. And I remember thinking to myself, what the heck? How? How is it possible? Like, this sounds like a very privileged experience, but that's really how I felt. Like, we had lived in these nice places, we had done these nice things. And so that was kind of my first moment of like, wow, it's not always how much you make that tells you how financially well off you're going to be. And the second was, I don't often share about this, but my dad telling me that I needed to become an attorney, I needed to become a doctor, or else I would have no chance. Because he looked at his life and said, I'm going to work till the day I die. And again, I had this like very incredulous view about this. Like, how is this possible? So I think that's really what the personal finance world showed me for the first time, was that you can have some agency over your financial life. It is something you can talk about. It doesn't have to be so taboo. I think also in the Hispanic community that I grew up in, there was a lot of like, oh, we don't spend money on that, must be nice. Very like, we hate rich people.
Yeah.
Right? Like, we hate rich people. We don't spend like that. And we're better than rich people. Like, I really grew up with that mentality because since my mom was a flight attendant, we traveled for free, but that didn't mean that we had the budget to like really go nuts while we were traveling. So I remember standing outside like souvenir shops with my dad, and my dad saying, oh, that's my girl. That's my girl. Like, you're not shopping. This is very like, good women don't spend a lot of money. My grandmother teaching me how to save money on laundry, how to use rice efficiently, how to buy rice efficiently, how to store it, how to cook with whatever in your fridge, how to change a Puerto Rican recipe like 7 times so that it was able, no matter what you had, you could still do it. And so I really grew up with that kind of like underlying anxiety. Being frugal is the only way to be a good person. And also kind of this belief of like, unless I'm an engineer or an attorney, then I'm probably going to not do so well, and all those things ended up not to be actually 100% true, which I think is what is so cool about the personal finance community, because it's a time where people can start to write their own stories versus just what their parents told them they needed to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I can relate so much to your story, because I think the more folks that I've talked to in our community, the more I realize how much there's this general sense of fear and anxiety that really dictates a lot of the decisions that people make with their money and their careers and the risks that they're willing to take. You mentioned therapy earlier as part of like your solution, if you will, to the problem. How was that process for you in first, like acknowledging that you may have things you need to address mental health wise that maybe you can't do on your own? Because I think there's a lot of stigma that comes from our community where it's like, what are you, crazy? You got to talk to a therapist. I did the best that I could. So, there's like a lot of guilting. Well, I've talked to my mom about this and she's just like, well, we did what we could. I'm sorry you have trauma, but it's also just like, we're not really asking for you to apologize. We're just asking for your grace and like understanding that, this shit's heavy.
It is. And I think that I can't put my finger on what it is about the Hispanic community that makes therapy so weird, but it is. Like, I truly have learned over time that it's not something I can really talk a ton to my parents about. Like, my dad could look at his life, and I know this of my other Hispanic friends too, that we could be like, you could talk to your parents about like, hey, so let's just talk for a second about that person that you murdered. Okay. I think that was wrong. And they'd be like, pero like, I had to do what I had to do. And do you know what I mean? Like, they're just like not the type of people who are going to be like, you know what? Let me reflect. I'd love to reflect and apologize for my wrongdoings. Like, it's not that culture, even in the worst of situations. And so I think there's kind of some humor. I think that's the only thing that's like gotten me through it is I've looked at my Hispanic family and said, I love this family. And at the same time, it is so different than my husband's family, who is completely Anglo in every way. And I have to just be okay with some things they might come with and be like, yes, we love that. And other things they won't. So, to be frank, my dad did not support my business when I started it. He did not support my business because the idea that people could change their financial life was kind of like a pipe dream. It's like you're selling them something that isn't real. You must be scamming them. I think there's a lot of fear of scams in the Hispanic community. We are very protective about talking about our money to anyone. Even talking about my financial life online has been really hard for my Hispanic family. I've had many conversations where we have to go through it and talk about it, and it's not normal in the culture. And I think the only thing for me is kind of, instead of saying, well, I'm doing something wrong, it's saying, okay, well, this may not be something that my family's culture is used to, but that doesn't mean I can't still make choices that I may want to make in my life. And I think that for a lot of Hispanic men, again, I'm totally generalizing, but I can just think of my dad and my uncles and, things like that. It's like there's this real value in stability, being an employee, getting a paycheck, that this type of risk to become an entrepreneur is just frankly uncomfortable. And I can identify and really understand that. I think the only difference is you and I get the privilege right now to be like, well, we built successful businesses. So we know it's possible, where a lot of people who aren't on the other side of that, it's hard for them to imagine. Like, they can't get their brain there. And that's okay too, because all we know is our own experience.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the key topics that I talk about in my book is this idea that our parents had to figure out how to survive. And when you're in a situation where you just are trying to keep your head above water, you don't have the luxury of taking risks. You don't have the luxury to dream. And once you're so far removed from that potential, going back to that space is like such a foreign concept. But for the second generation, the ones that get the privilege of a more stable life, higher levels of education, more access to income generating jobs and things like that, we build that luxury of being able to dream, to take risks. And that's why it feels so foreign to folks who don't have that access to the privilege, right? So it's two lived experiences that are completely in contradiction with each other. And that's why I think it's so important, if you are that generation where you have had that level of privilege and you have the ability to think like beyond the struggle, you have to kind of be okay with your family not necessarily being the cheerleaders for the dream that they don't understand. And you have to get in spaces with people who actually get it, who are on that same mission. And that's why I think the work that you do and the work that I do is so important, because it gives people permission to think beyond the struggle.
Yes. And that is so hard, especially like when you have parents who haven't had that experience and you're trying to break into that. And I think it's 100% right to say it's okay to just expect, maybe my family won't be my biggest cheerleaders. Maybe they won't be, but there's still, blood is blood and the rest is thin. That's what my family always says. And so I can also see the ways that my father does support me and does believe in me, but it's his fear that ultimately is the criticism. It's really his fear of wanting to make sure, you can still provide for your children and your life. And so I think sometimes it can come from a place of love. It's just a different way that we are hoping to get from our family sometimes.
It's true. It's true. And yeah, so let's dive into your debt freedom story, right? Because I think that's where a lot of folks start when it comes to transforming their personal finances. You get that first like eagle eye view on the full picture and you're like, holy shit, we have how much debt? When did this happen? How did this happen? How do we fix this? So what was that first realization moment for you? Did you download a net worth calculation tool? Like, did you go through all your statements? What was that first moment?
Yeah. So I would say my first moment was marrying my husband, because my dad's pretty money savvy. So I had gotten a scholarship for an in-state school. I actually wanted to go to a very similar school that my husband went to, but I didn't have a scholarship there. So my dad was like, you're not taking on debt. You're going to go to the in-state school that you have the largest thing. And I remember going like kicking and screaming and being like, well, what about my dreams? Right. And went to that. And thank God I was able to graduate without student debt. Like, I'm so grateful for his push on that. My husband, though, had a different experience and he went to a private school. And so when we got married after college, we now had some debt that we needed to pay off. So that was my first, I would say my first aha was our engagement, because I knew what we were coming into together. and we were both new professionals. He was only a year older than me. And then the second aha was when we moved to our first place that we lived, which was Arizona. We needed to buy 2 cars because we had 2 separate commutes. So I came in with my car. He didn't have a car. And all we had was I think at the time, I feel like we had like $4,000, $6,000. Like it was like we pulled all our money together and we're like, okay, this is what we have. And then I was starting my job and he was starting his job and I was smiling and dialing. And so eventually my car got wrecked. And so we got a settlement from the car company and we used that to buy another car and to put a down payment on another car. So that was more debt that we were assuming at the time. And so it was that kind of aha, like, oh my gosh, our debt is as large as my income.
Which was how much? Well, how much was your total debt?
So our total debt was $30,000. And when I started at my corporate sales job, I had a $30,000 salary.
Jeez. Okay. And that included your husband's student loan debt and the car notes.
The car note. Yeah. We had 1 car note. So we bought an old kind of like beater a little bit to try to save, but it didn't get us that far.
Got it. And you also mentioned that during your wedding planning, you're realizing like, oh, maybe this is not as easy to do as I thought it was as far as like financial planning and budgeting and maintaining your financial goals. So how do you get on the same page with your partner when it comes to having different money philosophies, right? Because I can imagine maybe he's had a different experience for his own personal finance education. What are your tips for couples, especially like get on the same page so that you can pursue something like a debt freedom plan?
Yeah. I think the first thing is marry the right person because I feel like that's the answer to everything. Marry the right person so that you can come together and collaborate in lieu of fighting against each other. I feel like when Jake and I got married, we knew his career at the time. He was in youth ministry. So we were not rolling in the Benjamins. He was a church worker. I became a church worker. Then I was a stay-at-home mom. Like this was not crazy money. We didn't have inheritances. We didn't have family assets. There was nothing like that. It was just the 2 of us starting out and doing our best. So I remember that Dave Ramsey class did facilitate conversation for us where it was like, so what was what was it like growing up in your household? And I learned my family was very hypervigilant about money. Really, we never stopped talking about money and we never stopped stressing about money. And his family was completely the opposite. Extremely money avoidant. We don't talk about this. It does not come up. I don't know what anybody makes. Like, it's just the way it is. And so I think that it helped that I had such a high stress level. So that made it really important to my husband. And then the other thing was that he was pursuing this career that was lower paying with the degree that we were paying off. And so he was committed to showing up at 200% for our budget meetings and our budget planning because he wanted to see how we could make this work. So I think that willingness helped us begin to start our own family culture with money. And I'm thankful kind of for that stress because if it wasn't for that stress at the beginning, I'm wondering if it would be where we are right now, 10 years from now, and we'd still be casually talking about it and not really, we wouldn't have a plan. We would still just have our debt kind of like whatever is happening to us versus we decided early, like, okay, what do we want this to be and how are we going to do this?
Yeah, I think, honestly, for a lot of folks, you have to kind of have the shit hit the fan. It's usually like that's the thing that motivates a lot of people. Unfortunately, it's not just like you wake up one day and you're just like, I just want to transform my financial life because it's Tuesday and it just feels like a good day to do that. It's always like there's some shit going wrong. Oh, I found out I can't afford a house because my student loan debt is too high and now my debt to income ratio is screwed. Or, wow, I really got shafted on this car note where I'm paying 12% interest because my credit sucks. And nobody ever told me how important it is to maintain your credit score and how do I fix this? So I think there's nothing wrong with like having those be the moments that wake you up. What sucks is when you do have those epiphanies and then you just kind of bury your head in the sand versus creating a plan. So can you take us through those initial meetings that you and your husband had when it comes to forming your debt freedom plan? Like what was the strategic approach that you guys took to make that happen?
Yeah. So back in the day, in the good old 2014 day when we were planning our wedding, all we had was the every dollar budget method. So I remember we spent a lot of time focusing on our goals and visioning for the future. My husband and we're dreamers. I don't know if you can tell because we got married young or whatever. And when we didn't have the money and blah, blah, blah. But that is what motivates us. So I remember we had a date we drove out to some like mountain town, and it was in Flagstaff, Arizona. We were at a coffee shop and we pulled out a napkin and we were like, okay, we need to get motivated about debt. And we said, what's our 5-year plan? And I remember we wrote on a napkin at this coffee shop in Flagstaff that we would be debt free in 5 years. And we thought, oh my gosh, that is crazy. Like, we had said we were going to be debt free. We said we would go to Europe once. We said, we wanted to have a baby. We wanted to buy a house, all this stuff. And again, this felt really big to us. But I think if you start with what you're hoping for, I think it helps you get through the groundwork better. Like, at least for my clients, I suggest the same thing, that we get really, really specific on why the heck are we doing this? Because nobody, like you said, wakes up and says, I just want to transform my finances today. Like, no, you're doing it because you're stressed about your debt. You're doing it because you want to give your kids a better future. You're doing it because you want to quit your corporate job that you hate. You're doing it because X, Y, Z. What is it in your life that your goal is actually about? Get specific about that. And that, I think, helps get like buy-in, because it did for us. Because at the beginning of our debt-free journey, we were crazy. We were crazy as kids. Like, somebody should have stopped us. And I look back and I'm like, oh my God, like, I was flipping furniture on Facebook Marketplace. I was flipping cloth diapers. I was a crazy woman. And so I don't recommend that path to anyone, but we were young and we were wanting to do this fast. So we kind of treated it like a race. But our first budget meetings, we did the every dollar method, which I loathe at this time. I have ADHD. Like, what the actual heck? Like, what the actual heck? But that was all I had. So I was annoying. I was obsessive. I counted everything. And that didn't work in the long run, which is why I have my own, an automated budget system now that I help my clients set up, because I think budgeting is really tough when you're doing these like really anal tasks. But that's what we did at the beginning because we didn't know any better. So, but doing that helped, flipping, using every dollar we could. I was closing calls like it was my job because it was. And that's how we did it.
Yeah. I love the fact that you touch on increasing your income, right? Because I think, especially if you come from an immigrant household or you just grew up with people who had a scarcity mindset, it's very common to just hear like cutting back, clip coupons, shop on sale. And there's only so much you can do, right?
Yes.
There's only so much you can stretch your dollars. But when you actually add more dollars in circulation by starting a side hustle, by taking on an extra job, by looking for opportunities to earn income outside of your 9 to 5, I think that that really helps propel you faster to your financial goals. And I know that was the experience for me. And it's been the experience for a lot of my clients as well. It's just like, let's focus on how we can leverage your skills. Let's focus on what you can do to earn extra money, because you're going to reach a point where there is nowhere else to cut. And if the math is not mathing, we got to do something else.
Yes, you are absolutely right. And it's funny because at the time I was obsessed with frugality because, again, I had this idea of what it meant to be a good woman, a good girl. But when I look back at our debt-free journey, I can say, yeah, budgeting is what helped us. And also it helped that I brought home $15K in commission. You know what I mean? Like, it was these things that made it possible. But I kind of viewed, if I want to be good with money, I need to be frugal. And it wasn't until a couple years later that I realized, oh, that's actually like conditioning that I have, not necessarily something that's true.
Yeah. Let's talk more about budgeting because, I think it's a very unsexy thing for a lot of folks because they associate it with deprivation and diet culture and delayed gratification and suffering. So it's like, yeah, the marketing on budgeting sucks. Like, we need a whole new message around it. For me, I started to truly realize the potential of budgeting and like how powerful it can be when I didn't revolve everything around just paying off debt. When I actually started incorporating my goals and when I started rewarding myself for reaching those goals. So can you talk a little bit about what are some of those common mistakes that people that you've worked with make that make budgeting unsustainable and maybe what we should be doing instead?
Hello. Again, how much time do we have? This is huge. I think that budgeting not only gets bad marketing, but I think it's frankly really outdated the way most people are taught to budget. And so I think the first thing would be to remember that making a budget is not about restricting yourself. It's about making a plan for what you're going to do with your money. And I think that can be a really important reframe for people. Like when you invite your partner to a budget meeting, you're not inviting them into a how can we spend less meeting. We're inviting them into a hey babe, what do we want to spend on meeting? And that's a different mindset. The next thing is I think I see a lot of people go through this, I call it the binge purge cycle of financial stress, which is the all or nothing mentality. So many people will say, oh my God, I'm going to get my money together. This is what I'm going to do. And they go really freaking hard. So they get a color coordinated sheet and they use the highlighters and they do, I don't know, a visual tracker and they print things and they make a spreadsheet and they're like, oh, I have a budget for September now. And then 1 week goes by and life is not like your crystal ball, which you don't have, says. And so what they end up doing is they start to be like, damn it, like I'm not good at this. They get really serious and then they try to cut everything and then they get really anal about all their expenses. And then, I don't know, 3 weeks in, they say, this is like really freaking hard. I don't think I'm good at this. And then they start to just kind of spend on whatever, right? So it's like this avoidant / anxious cycle, right? Because it only takes enough time of being avoidant before you look at your savings or you look at your debt or you think about your financial life and you're like, oh, crap, I don't want to do that. I want to be good with my money. And then you get back on the train, but then you get too much on the train, right? And then you restrict yourself and then you end up saying, this is too hard. And then, it goes round and round. So I think being all or nothing with budgeting is a really huge downfall that most people don't even realize that they're caught in this cycle. And so I think if somebody wants to budget for the first time, it would be to ask yourself, how can you make a plan for your money that you don't want to cheat from? Not how can I make a spreadsheet on paper that looks so good that it's like, oh, look at me. Like I get an A+. Nobody's grading you. If you don't do the plan that you make, guess how much that plan is worth? Nothing. Right? Like it's worth absolutely nothing because you didn't do it. So instead of us trying to make the perfect plan that has all these different categories, we need to ask ourselves, how do you actually spend your money? How does money come in and out of your life? And how do we set up a system that is as automated as possible to support that, keep you in check, right? My goal with a budget is that it is comfortable enough that you can be yourself. If you feel like you're constantly self-editing during the month, like, oh shit, like I shouldn't buy that. Like that tells me maybe our numbers are a little too small because you should feel comfortable with the plan that you make, but also accountable. So you don't feel like I'm just like burning money at the grocery store. Like I'm at Whole Foods and I don't care. And I'm, buying whatever I want. Like you want something that's in between, not too hot, not too cold, just right. And I think a lot of people struggle to make that because it takes trial and error and not necessarily like the stress plan that you came up with at 3 a.m. after you watched a financial influencer. Like we have to make a sustainable plan. And that's a very different thing.
Yeah. And, I think a lot of people don't realize like how customizable budgeting is because you hear just about a couple different methods, right? The zero-based budget or the 50-30-20. And it's just like, first of all, you should not be budgeting the same as you progress in your finances. Like I started with a very aggressive zero-based budget in the beginning because I was trying to get out of debt and I wanted to know like where all my money was going. But after you're debt free, you should be refocusing how you relate to money. You might want to change to a values-based spending plan where you're funding your retirement and your savings goals first and then maybe figuring out how to live off the rest, or taking little pieces from different budgeting methods and figuring out what works for you. It's just like a workout plan. Like one workout plan is not going to get everybody to the results that they want. You have to pick and choose. How do you customize it for you? How do you fit your budgeting plan to your personality? How hands-on or hands-off do you want to be? And it's not just a one and done. It's an evolving thing. And I want everybody to get to a point where like, maybe you don't even have to budget at all because you've automated things so well that everything's getting paid, that you're making enough money to save and invest and reach your financial goals. And you're kind of just operating on autopilot. Like, I think that's the ultimate goal. We shouldn't have to be obsessed with our money for our entire lives.
No, I think that's not the goal. It's how can your money plan get you to where you want to be? And how can you be positive it's going to work for you? I think the other thing that I really focus on that I don't hear that many people focusing on is how do you also create like a dopamine relationship with your money? Because I think so often people have this very negative experience with budgeting. I talk a lot about the over categorization, but there could be other things going on, just like avoidance, the stress they feel when they look at their credit card debt. We actually have to be intentional about how to create a dopamine experience where you feel good about yourself when you check into your money. Because if we can do that, if we can start to like sprinkle some dopamine into your money relationship, even when you're in debt, it's going to make it actually easier for you to come back to this task that you've been avoiding. And then when you come back to the task, you're actually doing better at the task. And so then you feel better. And it's like this positive snowball forward that is possible if we can just start to shift how it feels when you're budgeting. So it's about the marketing of it, the system of it. But if I could encourage anyone, it would be if you're in the all or nothing cycle, get off. It doesn't have to be that way.
Yeah. What do those dopamine hits look like for you? Like, how do you treat yourself for meeting financial milestones?
Well, I'm a big sucker for treats. I treat myself in all scenarios because I love
Life
treats.
is short, man.
Life is short. But like one small thing that I do with all my clients and me, it really helps me is I found there was a lot of frustration with my bills, especially as like inflation continues. So everybody's experienced this, right? Like groceries, gasoline, it's just expensive to freaking exist right now. And so a lot of people, when they make a budget, they put their like hopes. So it's like, well, my electric bill is usually X. And so I hope it's X, or I hope it's like $5 under X. And so every time they make a plan, they make their plan with like that lower electric bill. And then what inevitably happens is their electric bill is higher. And what it makes them do is they go into their budget spreadsheet and they're like, damn it, like, oh, right. And it brings this anger into their bills with their spending at the grocery store. They're trying to still spend like it's 2015. It's not anymore. Like one of the most powerful things I think you can do with your plan is to be realistic and then some. So with all of our budget planning, we always guesstimate 10% higher for everything. And the reason I do that is because I want people to get a dopamine when they check back at their budget at the end and they're like, oh, that was lower, right? Like that's a really small way that you can infuse dopamine into your relationship with money. Because when it's lower, you say, oh, I get to put more towards debt this month, or actually I can spend more on fun this month or whatever. Like I have extra money. And all that is the way you make your plan. That's definitely a dopamine thing for me.
Yeah, don't set yourself up for failure, y'all. Like give yourself some buffer room because you just never know. Things happen and we can plan as best as we can, but the more realistic your plan is, the more likely you are to be successful. Okay, let's talk about something controversial that has some very strong opinions in the wealth building world. So I've heard from certain folks who are believers that you should not invest a single dollar until you are debt free. And then I have heard, the other side of the coin where you should absolutely be investing even if you are in a debt freedom plan. What's your take on it?
So I believe that if you have high interest credit card debt, that is the only time that your minimum investment should be your workplace match if you have one. So I believe that even someone who is experiencing high credit card debt, I think it's still a good idea to put that 2 or 3% or whatever your company is offering into your retirement because you don't get a second chance with that. You don't get the free money again. Like it's take it now or it's gone. I do think that credit card debt is really predatory for a lot of people when we're paying 30%, 22% interest on high amounts of money. It's important that we are aggressive with paying that off. Now, where things change for me is once somebody has an emergency fund and they've paid off all their credit card debt, or what I say would be high interest debt. Once you've paid that off, I believe that you should be investing to the point where you're on track for retirement. So on track is different than investing every cent. On track is also different than just investing your workplace match. Typically, it's something in between because your workplace match is it's rarely, unless you have an amazing job that gives you really great benefits. A lot of times it's not enough for people to be on track. So I think it's after you get out of high interest debt, you should make sure that you're on track for your own retirement. And then once you're totally debt free, other than your mortgage, go ham. Like if you want to be a fire person, you want to open up a business, you want to whatever, like as long as you don't stop contributing to be on track for retirement, start building other forms of investment if you want to.
Yeah. What do we say to folks who are earning, the average American salary as a household, which is somewhere around like $75,000 a year? And where is this money going to come from, Nicole? Like, I would love to be saving for retirement, but the fact is, I think I read a statistic the other day that like over 60% of millennials have no retirement savings, which literally sent me over the edge. So what do we tell folks that it's just like, where the hell is this retirement money going to come from? Because I can barely pay my freaking bills.
I love that you asked that because I think that it's hard for people. Like the first thing I just want to say is like, I acknowledge that it's really, really hard. It is hard for everyone because the cost of living has gone so crazy high in the past 10 years. Housing, education, the grocery store, like medical. It is crazy. And I know that because I'm sitting here, knee to knee with people in their monthly bills, high earners, lower earners. It is hard. The cost of living is hard. So the first thing I would say is give yourself some empathy. Like notice, hey, it's hard. And also I need to figure out a plan for me because you kind of saying it's hard for me to find the money. Therefore I don't want to make a plan. That's never going to serve you because you're never just wake up one day out of debt. It doesn't accidentally happen. The only way we can get there is if we make a plan. So don't be afraid to make a plan, even though it's hard, even if you don't see a way out. I always encourage my clients that any problem, I don't care what it is, any problem is financially fixable with a plan. The only problems that are not are the ones that we don't make a plan for. So if you can give yourself permission to make a plan, that in itself is already a form of rebellion. Like, because you're showing yourself that you think it's possible, which I know for me, growing up in a scarcity household, that feels like rebellious to do that and to be like, I can make a plan maybe out of this, even if I don't see the way out. And the next thing, it would be trust that you're smart. You're really freaking smart. If you're listening to this right now, you are a smart person. Trust your mind to get curious about your financial situation. One of the things I see people struggle with the most is that they have no curiosity. They just look at their financial situation and say, well, it is the way it is, or that's the cost of housing. That's the cost of this. That's the cost of that. This is what I can make in my industry, right? Like what we do when we have that mentality is we don't believe we can make any changes. And that is like really toxic for your financial goals, because if you're not willing to get curious about the issues that you're running up against, which is, okay, this is what people in my industry are making in this area. I wonder what people in my industry make in a different area. Do they make more? Like, who are the high earners in my industry and why are they making more? What is that about? It's getting curious about your financial problems, because everything has a solution. It may not be the right solution for you, but if you can bring an energy of curiosity, I really trust people are really freaking smart. But the problem is that we're afraid to have that curiosity because we're afraid of being disappointed.
Yeah, you don't know what you're going to realize about yourself and maybe how much you are potentially part of the problem.
Well, yeah, I think it's hard and it's vulnerable to be curious, but I think people are really, really freaking smart.
I love that advice. I think one of the things that sounds like it's been an advantage to you, and I know it's been one for me, is just I'm okay not knowing everything. And I'm okay being a perpetual learner and asking questions and not feeling like I should know this because I'm X years old or I have this career and blah, blah. At the end of the day, y'all, nobody teaches us this shit unless you're one of the lucky few who has had some financial literacy baked into your upbringing or you took some classes. Most of us confront these issues when we are adults and we're trying to figure out how to take care of current self, plan for future self. If you have a family, plan for that too. There's just a lot of things that we really won't confront financially until we're out here in the world trying, experimenting, failing, succeeding. But always, I think it's important to maintain what you said, this sense of curiosity. If things aren't working, why? And how can we fix that? I know you're a mom, you're a parent, and, I talk to a lot of parents who feel this sense of how do I balance my desires to help my children financially, not feel the same struggle that I may have grown up with, but also make sure that I'm good. What's your take on that?
So I'm a huge believer in the oxygen mask method of finances, which is you got to put your oxygen mask on first before you can put it on your children, which means if you are not set for retirement, do not be putting money in your kids' 529. That is my opinion. But your kids can take a loan for college if they have to. They can get a scholarship for college. You do not get a loan for retirement.
Yeah, is there no retirement scholarships for being a good adult?
Yeah. And the other thing too that I remember about growing up is my parents would always say, "You're going to take care of me, right? You'll take care of me." From when I was young. And I think that's common in Hispanic families.
Oh,
that it's
absolutely.
like, you have to be ready, and I grew up watching my mom care for her dad, and caretaking being a really big part of the Hispanic culture. And we also always had someone living in our house. It was my mom's cousin or my mom's sort of cousin who was living with us. Like my cousin living with us, we always had somebody that we were like helping. And so I viewed it as, oh, okay, this is just normal. When in reality, that actually puts a lot of stress on your children. I would rather, and this is me, but I think a lot of people would probably agree that if they have to financially care for their parents, but their parents paid for their college education, I would be pissed. I would be like, yo, because when your parents are aging when your kids are going through high school, when your kids are going to college. And so all of a sudden, you're trying to support your kids, you're trying to support your family at the same time, and your parents don't have a financial plan. And so don't be that parent. Don't feel bad for putting your oxygen mask on first, because I think you're giving your kids an amazing, amazing life where they're not worried of, oh my God, I'm my parents' retirement plan. That's a completely different level of worry that I'm my mother's conservator and guardian, and it is pressure. It is a lot to know that you are somebody's plan. So I think a lot of parents feel bad about prioritizing their retirement, but I like to reframe that and talk about how you taking care of yourself actually is a way of taking care of your children and giving them a less stressful adult life because you were willing to make sure you could breathe before putting theirs on.
I feel like this conversation has been such a breath of fresh air. I know people are going to be so inspired to follow you, find out more about you, find out how they can work with you and Arise Financial Coaching. So please tell us where we can find you, Nicole, and how do you work with your clients to help them set themselves up for financial success?
So we are really active on Instagram, social media, TikTok. We like to put out a lot of free financial content. So that is arise.financial.coaching. You can go to our website, which is arise.financial. There's no .com. And we have opportunities for you to find out about working with us. We offer free calls to everyone. So no matter what you're going through financially, if you are somebody who's like, maybe I could benefit from coaching. I have been trying this for years and years, and I'm just not getting the results I want to get, and I need to make a change. Consider booking a free call with us. We'll talk to you about your situation. And we love pointing people in the right direction, which is sometimes coaching, sometimes it's a CPA, sometimes it's an advisor, sometimes it's a therapist. Like, let's be real. We want to be a resource for people so that they can make their next best step financially.
This is amazing. Nicole, I want to thank you for your time, for sharing your story, and for giving us permission to think beyond the struggle and to realize that we can be earning ordinary amounts of money and do extraordinary things, but it all starts with making a decision that you want more. Thank you for the work that you do, and we'll have all of her episode resources mentioned in the show notes. So thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.